The Legend of Heroes series is quite expansive and can be overwhelming for someone just now getting into the series. For Japanese fans, the game have been around since the 80s, and have also been a staple in their JRPG libraries along with Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. But for many Western fans, the game just seemed to pop out of nowhere over the past few years. For the most part, the games interconnect and characters move from one country to another to appear in multiple games as main characters, important NPCs, or for just a cameo. Because the series is so large, I'm going to break this up into multiple videos as to not overwhelm you, and today I'm going to be focusing on the origins of the series with Dragon Slayer and the Gagharv Trilogy. Trails in the Sky and Trails of Cold Steel overviews will follow in future videos. All of the Legend of Heroes games are developed by Falcom Corporation and had their origins in the Dragon Slayer games, which is the progenitor for action RPGs and JRPGs as we know them today. The original Dragon Slayer was released in 1984 and was met with great success. It introduced dungeon crawling, item management, and puzzles that influenced The Legend of Zelda, as well as Dragon Quest a few years later. Falcom continued with the series by creating many more titles throughout the 80s, but by and large, they all used the action RPG formula. Many of these games were released in America, but under different monikers, such as Sorcerion, Vaxanadu, and Legacy of the Wizard. In 1989, the company decided to change that by releasing an experimental game to compete with the success of Dragon Quest, a turn-based RPG titled Dragon Slayer: The Legend of Heroes. As the first Legend of Heroes game, it's quite basic, but a lot of fun to play, and thankfully, 2 years after its Japanese release, it got translated, along with voice acting, to the ill-fated, unsuccessful, and overpriced TurboGrafx-16. Although it didn't reach a large audience at the time, due to it not being released on the much more popular SNES, the game's quite solid, featuring NPCs who change their dialogue based upon the story, and stat customization upon leveling up. To put this into perspective, the other notable RPG releases in 1991 were Dragon Warrior 3 for the NES and Final Fantasy IV for the SNES. The story follows Logan, the Prince of Farlane Castle, and his friends who journey across the world to avenge his father's death and reclaim his rightful throne. While nothing groundbreaking, it does set the tone for other Legend of Heroes games to follow, such as NPCs with their own unique stories to tell, monsters appearing on screen, and the chapter system that all future games would use, and that Dragon Quest IV would copy. 3 years later, following the success of the first Legend of Heroes game, Falcom decided to release a sequel, this time following Prince Logan's son, Atlas, who goes off on an adventure after spotting men in spacesuits outside the city. This established yet another trend in the Legend of Heroes series, namely, sequels that follow and feature characters from previous games. Unfortunately, this game never saw the light of day in the West, and there's no active translation effort either. This may be because it's widely regarded as the black sheep of the series. During the 90s, Falcom decided to let the Legend of Heroes series flourish on its own by dropping the Dragon Slayer name and releasing 3 more games, to be known as the Gagharv Trilogy. These games are completely independent of Dragon Slayer Legend of Heroes games and make no nods or references to them. They completely stand alone. Unfortunately, none of these would be released in the West, and there would be a 15-year wait between English releases in the underrated series. Compounded with the hiatus, the games were botched beyond all recognition in gameplay, release order, and translation, further isolating the games and severely retarding the growth of any possible fanbase. The 3 games all take place in the same world, but their inhabitants are isolated from each other because of a giant cleft in the earth, the Gagharv, as well as an impenetrable mountain range called the Backbone of the Serpent that splits the world into thirds and separates the 3 main regions from one another. No one can pass through or around the Gagharv, and the inhabitants of each world wonder what lies beyond it. It's a great concept for the trilogy and works very well by having each game take place in one of the 3 respective regions around the Gagharv. But before I delve too deep into the games, I need to alleviate any confusion because there's a lot in regards to the timeline of the said games. The original Japanese release order was Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, followed by Tear of Vermilion, then Song of the Ocean. But Namco screwed this up by switching the original release order, first releasing Tear of Vermilion, then Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch. To compound this, the game's timeline begins with a Tear of Vermilion, followed by Song of the Ocean, and then finally Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch. So, to make a long story short, for an optimal playthrough of the trilogy, just play Moonlight Witch first, then Vermilion, then finally Song of the Ocean in order to experience the games the way that the developers originally intended. Although the games were first released in Japan for the PC, then remade for both the Saturn and the PlayStation, Western gamers never got to experience the originals or the charming remakes. Our only taste of the series comes in a series of botched ports released for the PSP in the mid-2000s. Because all 3 games were ported to the PSP around the same time and handled by Namco, they all use the same engine, so their gameplay and graphics are pretty much identical from one to the next. For the Gag-Harv Trilogy, Falcom decided to move away from the traditional Dragon Quest type battle system to a more tactical but still pretty basic system, which was further refined in future releases. All enemies now appear on the map, and it's pretty easy to avoid them since most of them just kind of run away from you once you reach the recommended level. Also, the games use a Suikoden-type leveling system, where the lower level that you are, the more experience monsters reward you with, and this streamlines the game and allows you to reach the recommended level with minimal effort. This is great because in all 3 games, combat takes a backseat to the story, where the real meat of the game lies. While Dragon Slayer: The Legend of Heroes had a serviceable story with many NPCs and voice acting, it really wasn't anything to write home about. Falcom decided to really up their game with the story, world building, NPCs, and lore with these Gag-Harv games. The stories where these games shined, especially with Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch. But we wouldn't know that because of the atrocious English translations. In all 3 games, the majority of the dialogue reads as if it was put through a machine translation with little to no editing or polishing afterwards. It's readable and somewhat comical to go through, but much of the nuance of the story is lost on us. Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch, the first game released in the trilogy, but the last chronologically, is a coming-of-age story that follows the pilgrimage of 2 teenagers, Yurio and Chris, as they journey around the world to visit 5 magic mirrors, as everyone in their small rural village has done for years previously. Their journey follows that of the Moonlight Witch, who first made the pilgrimage years ago, and when she peered into the magic mirrors, she was able to glimpse the future and help those that she encountered. However, upon completing her pilgrimage, she mysteriously vanished. Following in her footsteps through the land of Tercewheel, Yurio and Chris also have visions of the future, and they try their best to help each village while trying to uncover the mystery of the disappearance of the Moonlight Witch and what the visions they see in the mirrors really mean. A Tear of Vermilion takes place 56 years prior to the events of Moonlight Witch across the Gag-Harv in Elfilden. This land is home to 2 warring factions representing 2 gods, Bardus of the Light and Octum of the Dark. Our hero Avon is caught in the middle of these powerful forces when, at a young age, his home is attacked and his sister is spirited away. 10 years later, he takes off on a journey with his best friend Mile to reunite with her and uncover the secrets of the Bardus Church and Octum's Apostles. It has arguably the best story in the series, and Vermilion does do a lot of things right. There's much more exploration, treasure hunting, and party members who come and go throughout your journey. There are many times when you have to traverse the entire land of Elfilden and revisit areas where you can see noticeable changes in towns and NPCs as a direct result of your actions. Also, the Bracer Guild is introduced here, which is greatly expanded upon in the Trails in the Sky games. The final game of the trilogy, but the second chronologically, Song of the Ocean centers around a small musical troupe's journey of discovery and their secret quest to gather all of the mysterious resonant stones. McBain, the hero's grandfather, finds a magic map showing the location of these stones, and he takes his grandchild Fort, along with his best friend and love interest Una, on a quest around Welt Luna to find them all. These stones work almost like materia, where when you equip them on a character, they teach new magic and affect stats as well, which allows for customization not previously seen in the series. It's a precursor to the orbment system prevalent in the Trails series. In many ways, Song of the Ocean channels much of the adventurous spirit of Moonlight Witch. Both are journeys of self-discovery, and both involve trailing in the shadows of a past adventurer, here portrayed as the composer Leon Richter. It also acts to tie together the whole Gag-Harv trilogy. Song of the Ocean takes place a little bit after Tear of Vermilion, but still long before Moonlight Witch. The game does do a great job tying up the series, giving us access to previous protagonists, such as Avon and Mile, and allowing us to finally find the Moonlight Witch and put a stop to the evil throughout the land once and for all. Well, that just about covers the first 5 games of the Legend of Heroes series, so tune in for part 2 whenever I go over the Trails in the Sky series. This has been David. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.